Muslim scholar dies, returns with a shocking revelation about Allah's mercy. My name is Tariq al-Hassan, and for 40 years, my life was built on the bedrock of knowledge. I was a scholar of Islam, a man whose world was defined by the scent of old paper and the intricate, beautiful architecture of divine law. My library was my sanctuary, its shelves groaning under the weight of tafsir, hadith, fiqh, and kalam. I could trace the chain of narration for a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, with the precision of a surgeon. I could debate the finer points of Islamic jurisprudence for hours, my mind a well-honed instrument sharpened on the whetstone of logic and textual evidence. I saw faith as a fortress, its walls built from the commandments of the Quran and the traditions of the Sunnah. To live a righteous life was to live within these walls, to follow the rules meticulously, to understand the boundaries. Allah, in my understanding, was the ultimate lawgiver, the just king, whose perfection was manifest in the perfect system he had revealed. I loved him with a profound and reverent awe, the love a loyal subject has for a majestic, powerful, and sometimes fearsome monarch. The primary emotion that guided my practice was a deep, abiding fear of his judgment. It was a fear I considered righteous, a catalyst for obedience, the very beginning of wisdom. My wife, Aisha, possessed a different kind of faith, one that often mystified me. Her Islam was a matter of the heart, full of devotion, tears of gratitude in her prayers, and a simple, unshakable trust in Allah's mercy. She would talk to God as if he were in the room, a loving confidant. I found it sweet but unsophisticated, lacking the intellectual rigor I believed was necessary for a truly mature faith. My son, Kareem, a brilliant engineer educated in the West, respected my piety but saw it as an artifact of a bygone era. For him, the world was a matter of physics and code, not divine decrees. We loved each other, but a gulf of understanding separated us. In the quiet hours of the night, surrounded by my books, I would sometimes feel a strange hollowness, a spiritual dryness that no amount of intellectual pursuit could quench. It felt like thirsting to death in a library full of books describing water. I would dismiss the feeling as a whisper from shaitan, a weakness in my iman, and I would dive deeper into my studies, seeking refuge in the certainty of the text. I was preparing to deliver a keynote address at an international conference in Kuala Lumpur, a culmination of my life's work on the concept of divine justice in Islamic law. My argument was intricate, my evidence unassailable. I felt a surge of pride, not just for my work, but for my role as a defender of this perfect, logical system. I was a guardian of the fortress. I had no idea that I was about to be dragged from its gates and shown that the fortress I so carefully guarded was but a single grain of sand on the shore of an infinite ocean. The journey to the conference was uneventful until the descent. I remember looking out the small airplane window, watching the patchwork of green jungle and red roofs grow larger, my mind rehearsing the opening lines of my speech. I felt a familiar twinge in my chest, a mild indigestion I'd had before. I reached for a bottle of water. Then the twinge became a grip, a merciless, crushing fist, squeezing the very life from my heart. It was a pain beyond description, an all-consuming fire that obliterated thought. My perfectly ordered mind collapsed into a single primal scream of agony. I slumped forward, my head hitting the tray table. The world around me became a distorted nightmare of sound. A flight attendant's panicked voice, the shouts of other passengers, a desperate call for a doctor. I could feel a strange separation beginning, my consciousness pulling away from the searing pain in my chest. My body was a vessel of torment, but a part of me was already drifting away from it. The last thing I saw with my physical eyes was the frantic face of a young doctor who had rushed from a few rows back, his hands pressing down on my chest with a brutal, rhythmic force. Then, the physical world winked out like a snuffed candle. I was floating. The chaos, the pain, the frantic energy of the airplane cabin were all below me. I was near the ceiling, looking down at a scene of contained horror. I saw my own body, slumped in the aisle now, my face a ghastly shade of gray. I saw the young doctor working, sweat beading on his forehead. I saw Aisha, who was supposed to meet me at the hotel, and I felt a pang of sorrow so deep it was a physical sensation, even in my disembodied state. There was no fear, only a profound and surreal detachment. I was an observer at my own demise. The sounds of the cabin faded, replaced by an encroaching silence. The scene below me began to dim, as if a thick, dark veil was being lowered. The detachment was shattered by a new feeling, a cold, creeping dread that began in the core of my being. I was no longer in the airplane. I was somewhere else entirely, adrift in a darkness that was absolute. It was not the mere absence of light. It was a substance, a presence. It was cold, cloying, and it radiated an ancient, bottomless despair. This was a place where hope had never existed. In that suffocating void, I was not alone. The darkness coalesced into forms, indistinct but utterly menacing. They weren't demons with horns and tails from storybooks. They were far more terrifying. They were embodiments of my own spiritual diseases. One, a towering figure of arrogance, swirled around me, formed from the smoke of my pride. It whispered in a voice that was my own, yet twisted with mockery. "Where are your books now, scholar? Where is your evidence? You built a fortress of law, but you walled your own heart inside. You judged the world, and now you are judged by your own judgments." Another shadow, smaller but more insidious, slithered around me, a creature of pure, unadulterated legalism. "You prayed 5 times a day," it hissed. "But did your heart ever truly bow? You gave the zakat to the exact decimal, but did you ever feel the pain of the one receiving it? Your deeds are a perfect, hollow shell." Each word was a shard of ice, not because they were lies, but because they were the devastating truth. My knowledge, my discipline, my reputation, they were all worthless here. They were the very bars of my prison. This was the hell I had always feared, the realm of perfect, unassailable justice, and it was a mirror of my own soul. The fear was absolute. It was the certainty of eternal separation from everything good and true. In that abyss of my own making, stripped of everything I had ever been, every scholarly argument and complex legal opinion fell away, useless dust. All that remained was the raw, terrified core of a created being. I had no eloquent dua, no memorized verse to recite. All I had was a single desperate, broken cry that tore from the depths of my spirit, a cry not of the tongue but of the soul itself. A cry that was nothing more than a name, the name I had taught others to fear but my wife had taught me to love. Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, O most gracious, O most merciful. The cry was a single point of light in an eternity of darkness. It was a soundless scream that echoed not in the void, but in the heart of reality itself. And reality answered. In the far distance, a speck of light appeared. It was infinitesimally small, yet it contained more substance, more weight, than all the crushing darkness combined. The whispering, mocking shadows around me faltered, their forms seeming to thin and waver, as if the very concept of this light was anathema to their existence. The light did not travel towards me in a linear way, rather the space between us simply collapsed. It was not approaching me. It was revealing itself to me, as if it had been there all along, hidden only by the veil of my own fear and pride. As it grew, it didn't push the darkness away. The darkness was simply unmade in its presence. The suffocating cold was replaced by a warmth that was not a temperature, but a welcome. It was the feeling of 1,000 homecomings, the relief of a lifetime of burdens being lifted from my shoulders. The light expanded until it was everything. I was no longer looking at it. I was in it. And I knew, with a certainty more profound than any fact I had ever learned from a book, that this light was not a thing. It was a presence. It was a living, conscious, infinite ocean of pure, unconditional mercy. There was no form, no face, no image to profane its utter transcendence, yet it was more personal than a human touch. I felt utterly and completely known. Every secret pride, every hidden judgment, every moment of doubt in my life was laid bare, not for judgment, but for healing. It was the feeling of being seen in my entirety and being loved, not in spite of my flaws, but with a love that encompassed them and rendered them meaningless. A voice communicated with me, not through sound waves and eardrums, but as a direct impartation of truth into my soul. The voice was both majestic and intimate, the authority of a king and the tenderness of a mother. "Tariq," it spoke, and my name in that voice was an affirmation of my very being. "Peace. Be at peace. You are known. You are loved." The fear, the pride, the scholarly arrogance, the 40 years of carefully constructed identity, it all dissolved like salt in water, leaving only the essence of a soul finally at rest in the presence of its creator. This was the reality I had only ever theorized about. This was Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. Before we move forward, the voice of mercy communicated its love, a constant, unchanging embrace. Let us look back, not with the eyes of a judge, but with the eyes of truth. My life began to unfold before me, not as a memory, but as a reliving. But this time, I experienced it from every perspective. I was a boy of 8, proud of the new coat my father had bought me. I saw a poorer boy in my neighborhood shivering in the cold, and I felt a pang of pity, quickly suppressed by a selfish desire to keep my own coat pristine. Now, in this new reality, I was that other boy. I felt the bitter wind on my skin, the sting of shame in my heart, the yearning for a warmth that was more than physical. I felt my own childhood indifference as a cold stone dropped into the well of his soul. The scene shifted. I was a young, ambitious scholar, publicly humiliating an older, less knowledgeable man in a debate over a minor point of ritual purity. I had reveled in my intellectual victory. Now, I was that old man. I felt the hot blush of shame creep up his neck, the crushing weight of his public dishonor, the way my sharp, clever words had wounded his simple, sincere faith. I saw my victory for what it was, a monument to my own ego, built on the rubble of another's dignity. The review continued, relentlessly gentle, unsparingly honest. I saw the countless hours I spent in my library, memorizing, analyzing, categorizing. Then the light showed me my wife, Aisha, in the next room, praying for my heart to soften, her prostrations on her simple prayer rug, generating more spiritual light than all my towering books combined. I felt her loneliness, her quiet yearning for a spiritual partnership that I'd been too arrogant to provide. I saw a young couple come to me, asking for a ruling on a difficult marital issue. I gave them the legally correct answer, a stern and rigid judgment based on ancient texts. I saw them leave my office, their shoulders slumped, the hope gone from their eyes. The light then showed me the mercy I could have offered, the path of reconciliation I could have guided them to, had my heart not been veiled by the harsh letter of the law. This life review was not the terrifying tribunal I had always imagined. There was no scale, no ledger of deeds. It was a divine classroom. The sorrow I felt was immense, but it was a clean, purifying sorrow, because every painful revelation was instantly bathed in the infinite, healing ocean of love that held me. I was not being condemned for my failures. I was being shown the true nature of success. When the last scene of my life had faded, I was left in the light, stripped bare of all my illusions. The man I thought I was, the great scholar, the pillar of the community, was a hollow facade. The regret was a deep, aching chasm in my soul, but it was a chasm immediately filled to overflowing by the unending cascade of mercy. You see now, the voice of the presence communicated, the ledger of the heart. You counted every prayer, but I count every tear of compassion. You measured every gram of charity, but I measure every tremor of love. I finally understood. My entire life had been a quest for the approval of a distant and demanding king, when all along, a loving father was waiting with open arms. But the law, my spirit cried out, the Sharia, the rules, are they not the path to you? The answer came not as a rebuke, but as a profound clarification that reordered my entire universe. The law is the riverbank I created to guide the water of. My mercy, the voice explained, It gives the river form and direction so that my servants will not be lost in the wilderness. You spent your life studying the composition of the stones and the soil of the riverbank, becoming an expert on its every curve and contour. But you rarely stooped to cup your hands and drink from the water itself. You taught others to admire the riverbank, even to fear straying from it. But you forgot to teach them that the entire purpose of the bank is to lead them to the life-giving water of mercy. A vision then opened before me, a vision of the earth. I saw the mosques, the churches, the synagogues, the temples. I saw people praying. I saw a man in a magnificent mosque, his recitation of the Quran technically perfect, his prostrations flawless. But his prayer rose like a thin, gray wisp of smoke, barely lifting from the ground, because his heart was filled with pride and thoughts of how others were perceiving his piety. Then I saw an old woman, alone in her small apartment, whispering a simple, broken prayer for her sick grandchild. Her words were not eloquent, her Arabic was flawed, but her prayer erupted from her heart like a blazing column of pure white light, soaring directly into the presence. I was being shown the ultimate reality of intention, of sincerity. The spirit of the law, not the letter, was the key. The law without mercy is a body without a soul, the voice concluded. It is a cage, not a shelter. You taught that my justice was my primary attribute, but my mercy precedes my wrath. My mercy is my very essence. This is the truth you forgot. The depth of this revelation was staggering. It wasn't just new information. It was a fundamental recalibration of reality itself. Everything I had built my life upon the primacy of law, the fear of judgment, the intellectual pursuit of divinity, was shown to be secondary to the simple, overwhelming truth of divine love and mercy. Why? My spirit asked, humbled into a state of pure wonder. Why are you showing this to me, the one who was so blind? The voice of the light, the presence of mercy, resonated with a new sense of purpose, a gentle but undeniable urgency. Because many of my servants, like you, have mistaken the house for the host. They have become so preoccupied with the rules of the house that they have forgotten the one who built it out of love for them. They live in fear of the master, when the master yearns only to welcome them to a feast. A faith built only on fear will build walls, not bridges. It will create judges, not healers. It will lead to pride in piety, not humility in service. The presence continued, its truth sinking into me like rain into parched earth. The world is groaning under the weight of judgment. My children judge one another, and they feel judged by me. They have forgotten how to love because they have forgotten that they are loved, unconditionally, infinitely. You were a master of the law. Your voice carried weight. Now, it will carry a new message. I felt a purpose solidify within me, a mission being inscribed onto my soul. You will go back, Tariq, the voice commanded, a command that felt like a gift. You will be a witness, not to my justice, for that is for me alone. You will be a witness to my mercy. You will tell the scholars to put down their books for a moment and listen to the weeping of the world. You will tell the imams to speak less of hellfire and more of my all-encompassing grace. You will tell the common man that the door to my presence is not barred by his sins, but opened by his repentance, and that my mercy rushes towards a repentant heart faster than he can imagine. Tell them I am not a distant tyrant. Tell them I am closer to them than their own jugular vein, waiting for them to simply turn. A part of me, a small, selfish part, wanted to refuse. I wanted to stay here, in this perfect peace, this perfect love, forever. But the truth of the message burned within me. The need of the world was too great. The beauty of this truth was too profound to keep to myself. I had to go back. My entire being consented to the mission. Yes, I will go. The instant my spirit agreed to the mission, the experience of paradise ended. There was no gentle farewell, no slow fade from the light. It was a violent, instantaneous recall, like a cosmic rope had been tied to my soul and yanked with impossible force. I was ripped from the ocean of mercy and slammed back into the tiny, broken prison of my body. The first sensation was an explosion of pure agony, A bolt of lightning seemed to strike my chest, and a desperate, ragged gasp tore through my lungs, a sound like a drowning man breaking the surface. My eyelids, heavy as stone shutters, flew open. The world flooded back in, a blurry, chaotic mess of painfully bright lights and frantic, distorted faces. I was on a gurney, being rushed through a hospital corridor. I saw the shocked face of the young doctor from the plane, his mouth agape. "We have a pulse. He's breathing on his own. I don't understand. He was gone for at least 15 minutes. He shouted, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and utter disbelief. The days that followed were a disorienting blur of tests, machines, and hushed conversations between doctors who spoke of me in terms of medical miracles and statistical impossibilities. They couldn't explain the complete lack of brain damage, the spontaneous recovery of a heart that had been still for so long. They called it luck. I knew it was mercy. Aisha was there when I finally awoke in the ICU. Her face was etched with worry, but her eyes shone with a light that I now recognized. It was the light of unwavering faith. She had been sitting by my bedside, her prayer beads in hand, for 2 days straight. "Alhamdulillah," she whispered, her tears falling onto my hand. I told Allah I would not stop asking for His mercy. He is Ar-Rahman Tariq. He listens. Her simple, heartfelt words were a direct confirmation from the physical world of the spiritual reality I had just witnessed. It was as if God had sent her to be my first anchor to this new truth. My son, Karim, arrived soon after. He was pale, his engineer's mind struggling to compute the impossible data. He hugged me, his relief palpable, but when I tried, in weak, fumbling words, to tell him what I had seen the light, the voice his face clouded with a familiar, loving skepticism. "Dad, you were anoxic. The brain can create very powerful, very real-feeling hallucinations under that kind of trauma. Let's just be grateful you're back." His words were not unkind, but they were the first stones in the wall of disbelief I knew I would now have to face. My old life was over. The doctors had saved my body, but God had saved my soul, and He had sent me back with a message that the world, including my own son, was not prepared to hear. My physical healing progressed, but it was overshadowed by a far more profound and difficult integration of the truth I now carried. The world looked the same, but it felt fundamentally different. Colors seemed more vibrant, human kindness more poignant, and human suffering more urgent. My old life, the life of the respected scholar, felt like a dream I had woken from. It was no longer my reality. When I was strong enough, I began to share my full story, first with Aisha, who listened not with surprise, but with deep, knowing tears of joy. "This is the God I have always known," she said, her faith validating my experience in a way no medical chart ever could. But with Karim, it was a constant, gentle struggle. "I believe you experience these things, Dad," he would say patiently. "But I believe the explanation is neurological, not theological." He was my beloved, skeptical son, the embodiment of the modern, rational world I was now tasked with addressing. The true test came when I met with my closest colleagues, the circle of senior scholars with whom I had debated and studied for decades. I invited 3 of them to my home, men whose intellect I respected and whose friendship I cherished. I sat them down in my library, the very room that had once been the center of my universe, and I told them everything. I spoke of the darkness of my own pride, of the life review through the lens of mercy, of the revelation that God's essence was love, not just law. I spoke with the fire of a man who had returned from the dead with good news. Their reaction was a cold, silent wave of shock that slowly hardened into disapproval. The eldest of them, Sheikh Abdullah, a man I had considered a mentor, finally broke the silence. His voice was heavy with disappointment. "Tariq, my brother, the trauma has affected your mind. What you are describing sounds like the emotionalism of the Sufis, not the rigorous, evidence-based theology of a true scholar. You speak of mercy as if it negates justice. This is a dangerous innovation, a bid'ah." The other 2 murmured in agreement, their faces masks of pity and concern. "You were a pillar of our community," another said. "We relied on your clarity. This is confusion." They saw my testimony not as a revelation, but as a fall from grace. They believed I had traded the solid ground of scholarship for the murky waters of mystical fantasy. In one afternoon, I became an outcast. The reputation I had spent a lifetime building crumbled into dust. The pain of their rejection was sharp, a fresh grief. But as I sat alone in my library after they left, I looked at the thousands of books surrounding me, and for the first time, I saw them not as sources of ultimate truth, but as beautiful, intricate maps. And I had been to the place the maps described. The pain of their rejection was real, but the certainty of the mercy I had experienced was infinitely more so. My old life was gone. My new one was just beginning. My old identity was stripped away, but I was not left empty. I was filled with a purpose that burned brighter than any academic ambition I had ever known. If the community of scholars would not listen, I would speak to anyone who would. I was no longer Dr. Tariq al-Hassan, the esteemed jurist. I was simply Tariq, a witness who had been shown a glimpse of the heart of God. Aisha, with her simple, profound wisdom, encouraged me. "Perhaps your audience was never meant to be the ones whose minds are already full," she said. "Perhaps it is for those whose hearts are empty and longing." We started small. We opened our home for a weekly gathering, a simple circle of remembrance, of dhikr. A few curious neighbors came, then friends of friends. They weren't scholars or imams. They were mechanics, teachers, housewives, students. They were people thirsty for the water, not for another analysis of the riverbank. I didn't lecture them on jurisprudence. I told them my story. I spoke of a God whose mercy is an ocean, and whose love is the very fabric of existence. I taught them that their smallest acts of kindness mattered more than the grandest displays of piety, that a sincere prayer from a broken heart was more beloved to God than the most eloquent sermon. And so, I feel I must speak to you now, directly, as if you were sitting here in my home, in our circle. You, who may be weighed down by your own failures, who may feel distant from God, who may have been taught to fear Him more than you love Him, I am here to tell you what I was shown. Your faith is not meant to be a prison of fear. It is meant to be a garden of love. Do not be afraid of God's judgment. Run to His mercy. His mercy is not a scarce commodity you must earn through perfect behavior. It is an infinite, ever-present reality waiting to embrace you the moment you turn towards it. Look at your life, at your world. The scholars will tell you to look for God in ancient texts, and that is good. But I tell you to look for Him also in the smile of a child, in the unexpected kindness of a stranger, in the relief of a cool breeze on a hot day. These are not random occurrences. They are love letters from the divine, whispers of Rahman. If you are a person of knowledge, I beg you, do not let your knowledge become a veil between your heart and your Creator. If it does not lead you to greater compassion, greater humility, and a greater love for all of creation, then it is a burden, not a blessing. Your true purpose is not to win debates, but to heal hearts, starting with your own. And if you feel you are not worthy, that your sins are too great, that is the whisper of despair. I have been to the place of despair, and I can tell you that the light is infinitely more powerful. The call to return is not a call to perfection. It is a call to connection. It is an invitation to a personal, loving, and transformative relationship with the source of all love. I was sent back to tell you this one, simple, world-altering truth. You are loved. You are loved more than you can possibly imagine, so please stop being afraid, open the door of your heart, and let the ocean of mercy rush in.